Good evening, everybody. Um, it's Saturday evening, and it's another episode of the Love Again podcast. And I think we only have one or two episodes left for the year. In January, it'll be a year that we started doing these podcasts. And so, coming up on the close of the year. So I think we got one. I think I got one or two interviews, and I think you'll enjoy them and be excited about that. Before we get into our conversation this this evening with our special guest with us, I just want to acknowledge this light, this new light that I have. This soft purple light is, I mean, what? this is this thing right here is this is absolutely awesome because I had left my ring light um in DC, and so I had to go out and grab and pick a new one. And so I just grabbed something. I came home and started playing with the buttons on it, and this purple light came up. I was like, "Oh, this is it. Like this is the light." So I just want to acknowledge this purple light. Um, amen for that. Today we have a special guest. Um, I'm glad that she made it to the podcast before the end of the year. We've just been working on trying to, nail down time to schedule. She's so busy, and so
As are you.
yes, absolutely. And
Okay.
so I acknowledge that. And so we finally nailed down a time to come together for the Love Again podcast. And we're going to talk about her podcast and the work that she's doing. But for the first time, hopefully not for the last time, we have my new friend. And I know Victor George is watching. And I think he's only watching just to see how many times we're going to mention his name in our podcast, uh, which is fine. That's my guy, and he is just um, uh, introduced me to some really good new friends that we are in contact almost every day, talking about who knows what at any random time, and so. Victor introduced us, and she's become a friend. And this is her first time on the podcast. I don't want to get your name. I can pronounce all your names. I say all your names, to which we're going to talk about. But Renata is a mother, a Christian, a podcaster, an entrepreneur. We're going to talk about that. She's also an administrator, and she's an educator. Um, and so when it talks about when we hear magic, black girl magic, she is kind of embodies what that means. And so for the first time to the Love Again podcast, we welcome Renata, and I'm going to let her pronounce her full name because only she could do it. But Renata, how are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you for such a lovely welcome. Uh, I, I typically just allow everyone to call me Renata Del Carmen.
Mhm,
That is my first name and first middle name. But
mhm.
as you can see, um, Patrick has honored my entire name, and that is that is Renata Del Carmen Jacinda Cardenas.
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 We
Renata del Carmen
yeah.
Jacinda Cardenas. If you want to say it correctly. Yeah.
So welcome. Thank you for finding time to
I'm
hang.
happy to be here.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad. I'm happy you're here too. Um, I'm interested in ethnicity and origins of names and things like that. You have more than a few of them, and I'm interested in how these things come together for two. But there are people who have two middle names, so I mean that's not a big deal. But these are some unique names, and so
Mhm.
could you explain to me the origin of names here?
Um, so my mom is Guyanese.
Mhm,
She came here from Guyana in the 60s.
mhm,
My father is Cuban, came here from Cuba around the same time.
mhm,
They met in Brooklyn, New York. The only place at that time I think they they could have met, aside from Miami, maybe. I don't know. Uh, my mom initially wanted to name me Abigail,
mhm,
oddly.
mhm,
And then she, as I guess near the end of her term, pregnancy term, she switched to Jacinda. But somehow my father's mother convinced her when I was born on the same day as a son that she had, who she named Renato, but he passed as an infant.
mhm,
I was born on the same day. So, given that I was born on that day, they decided to name me Renata or Renata. So Carmen, Jacinda,
mhm,
and of course my father's last name, Cardenas.
mhm, mhm. All of that's fascinating. Uh,
Very much so.
so,
I'm still fascinated by it.
yeah,
Yeah.
no. So you're first generation. Are you first generation of your
Born
family
here?
in the state?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Um, you're right. It seems like there was only two places your people could have met: Brooklyn and Miami. Um,
Right. Right.
but your father immigrated in the '60s to Cuba,
Mm-hmm.
so that means he was
Mm-hmm.
born during the Cuban Revolution. Like he was
Mm-hmm.
um, a part of a lot of Cubans who lived through that who came to the states. Did he ever talk about his Cuban upbringing?
Um, Not so much. I think he there was a lot of that happened in my family between my father coming here and my birth,
Mhm,
and a lot of different experiences with his siblings, with his mom, who developed diabetes and had to have one of her legs amputated. So a lot of his attention focused on her in my childhood. But
mhm,
also in the month that I was born, my oldest brother, his son, obviously was murdered. And so there was so much happening at that time that a lot of what I understand about my father and his past from Cuba to here is more of his resiliency and
mhm.
not so much of like what the culture was like in Cuba. A lot of that I had to learn through my sister, who is 18 years older than me.
Mhm, mhm. Have you made it back to Cuba?
I've been there once
Mhm,
in 2018.
mhm,
Um, Oddly enough, someone called me from Cuba yesterday and I missed the call. I don't know who it was.
mhm.
Don't know who it was. I would love for them to call me back.
Yep.
I don't
Call.
have
I mean, the
any.
number shows
Yeah,
up on the phone, right? You could actually
yeah,
call.
but I don't know who it is.
I know. Yeah, send a
What am I gonna
text.
call and say?
Yeah,
Send a text,
yeah.
maybe.
Send.
And lines of communication is it's not as easy
Mhm.
as just picking up the phone and calling.
Okay.
They probably had to go. They probably had to do a lot to get that call through. I'll
Mhm.
say that.
Okay. ¿Tú hablas español?
Very little.
Mm.
Very little. I can survive in a Spanish country.
Mhm, mhm.
But at this point, I'm in my 40s. So at this point, I can't blame my family, but no one in my family spoke to me in Spanish.
Got it.
So my sister learned from my father and my father's mother and my grandmother. My father's mother did not speak any English. So when I was little, I
Mhm,
was more inclined to speak it, but I grew up also mostly with my mom, so there wasn't a lot of Spanish speaking in my household.
Mhm.
So
Um,
to have a name like Renata del Carmen Jacinda Cardenas
you
is
would think,
very awkward.
yeah, like you would think, like you, you.
Very awkward. Uh-huh.
I get it.
Yeah.
Um,
And to look like this. And to look like this.
you know,
Because
there's
mhm.
that. Yeah, no, no, no. You should, pick it up in your spare time. Duolingo. Just be able to throw out some stuff here that it could
I
come.
agree with you.
Your mom's origin.
Hmm.
She was Ghanese.
Guyanese. So from Guyana, South America,
Guyana.
next to Venezuela.
Yeah. Did she ever talk to you about her origin story? Like, how did she end up in the States?
Well, she came here, I think, on her 18th birthday.
Hmm.
Um, she is one of nine children.
Hmm.
So they slowly started to migrate here one by one. And my mom is, well, maybe a few others, but my mom has not ever been back since. Like she has siblings that go back and forth all the time, but obviously they wanted to come here to make a better life for themselves. The way they described living in Guyana at that time was like what we would consider poverty.
Sure.
um my mom was a seamstress there, so she like made a lot of her own clothes, her siblings clothes. That was how she would help support the household, also supporting my grandmother with raising her siblings. And I think she wanted to experience something different and had friends who had come here. And so she came here and did still seamstress and eventually pursued nursing.
Hmm.
And that was her career until she retired a few years ago.
Um, have you ever been there?
I haven't. My family talked so poorly about the environment when they were there
Hmm.
that my cousins and I, we never felt like
Hmm.
like we wanted to go there. It's kind of like, oh, that doesn't sound like a good time.
Hmm.
But now it's developed so much.
Yeah.
I do have cousins that go often. They're DJs, so they go for like events and parties. Our family has land there, so
Mhm.
it's important that I go soon.
Yeah, no, I heard it's beautiful there. I had a couple of friends
Hmm.
going there to get away, and I think it may be a little different than the way your mother
Hmm.
remembers.
Exactly.
Mother remembers it. You're not the first person who's been on the show who has talked to me about growing up in New York. Uh,
Hmm.
New York is fascinating to me, um, and it's fascinating because it's so dense. Not the cleanest space that I've ever seen before in my life.
Mm-mm.
Um,
It's nasty.
Lord, I would,
I can say that. It's
okay,
nasty.
yeah, okay. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
And because I don't understand the typography, it confuses me.
Hmm.
So I may not be smart enough to live in New York, but specifically for Black people,
Hmm.
your mom and dad's generation, New York, Brooklyn, Harlem, Queens
Hmm.
seemed to be where there was these concentration of Black people from islands. Um,
Yeah.
And I'm always fascinated as to why that was. And did they talk to you about what was Brooklyn like when they first got here?
That's very interesting. So there wasn't a lot of conversation about what New York was like as much as what America was like. So one, as I said, my mom is one of nine kids, and one of my uncles came here the day after Martin Luther King was assassinated. So I think they just wanted to be somewhere that was safe for blacks, but also where they could hustle, so
Mhm.
to speak. And New York seemed like the place where they could like do a lot with the skills that they had and make ends meet, as opposed to like being in the South or somewhere else.
Sure, sure, sure.
Yeah.
It would seem to me like your father's experience coming out of Cuba, the end of the Cuban Revolution, or maybe even in the middle of it, coming to New York in the 60s, which was experiencing still the Harlem Renaissance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of all of the political and social and cultural, um, I want to say upheaval, but it was cresting in during that
Mm-hmm.
time. But it was also the civil rights movement. Like it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
the easiest place for people of color, even when they were, having a good time for the most
Mm-hmm.
part. All the minding their business. Um, I wonder, did he ever talk about, or did anybody ever talk about, or do you know um, about what the climate was for your parents who migrated here, coming to like more opportunities, more freedom, da da da, and then coming in to find out like this is just maybe just a little bit. I didn't even say better. It's just different. Like there's a struggle here when they got here.
Mm-hmm. I think so. That's a really good point that I've had to open eyes to in other conversations around this, because I see it now, even with my generation and Gen Z. Like when people come from other countries that where they feel like their opportunities are not as vast as what we have in America, they come with a deep intention for what they want to get done, what they want to accomplish.
Mhm.
And the way my family, specifically my mom, depicts it is as like, I came here, I struggled, I did what I had to do to make ends meet, but I made a way for myself.
Mhm.
So they never gave the impression that it was easy. They just always spoke to their resiliency. And like there are things like my siblings are a lot older than I am. My sister's 18 years older than I am. My brother's 11 years older than I am. So they saw a lot of uh
So
what my mom and dad were going through at that time. By the time they had me, life was different.
yeah, they had
And they,
kind of
there
evened
wasn't,
out everybody.
yeah, and it was like, we're not going back to that. You know what I mean? I'm the child that was uh I guess sheltered from a lot of what happened in the past. My brother would be like, you don't know this, mommy won't tell you this, but
Mhm.
during this time, this is what they were doing to make ends meet. Or during this time, yeah,
Yeah. No. So you're like Janet Jackson. Here's what.
maybe.
Here's how you like Janet. Janet knew Joseph very differently than Tito and Marlon
Mm-hmm.
knew. Like
Mm-hmm.
she's, young, the youngest.
Yeah,
So she didn't know hard times in Gary, Indiana. She moved
right,
to California by the time she was 3 or 4. She grew up with palm trees. She didn't know, you know,
right,
the coldness and how difficult and harsh it was. So by the time Joe and Catherine get to California, whole life is different. Like the upbringing,
right,
it ain't what it was. They had kind of, like you said, life had evened out, and
right.
so coming up in a family where you're the youngest and didn't experience what life was like at the very
Mm-hmm.
beginning is a different. It's a different experience.
Absolutely. My brother has always told me, like, he always feels like I'm spoiled, or like I have had a different mom. He I think, so just kind of to give an idea of what it was like when my brother was born. Even when I was born, my mom was still living in an apartment, I think, but my brother was the one that saw like my mom work from at night while he was with different family members while she worked, or like at one point he was back in Guyana. While when I was younger, we lived in a house and like we had milk delivered. It was just a very different life. It's a very different life.
No, and
Um,
they're different parents too, right? Because
right.
there's 10 years between me and my younger brother, and of course he's spoiled. Of course he gets away with absolutely everything. I mean, it's not even like like.
It's given
But you know what?
their trauma there,
No, no,
Patrick.
I mean, it is just the truth. It is just the truth. But what I came to realize is that, oh well, you have a different parent, right?
Hmm.
My mother was in her early 20s, and so that's different from being in your early to mid 30s, right? That's
Right.
you're a different person. Um, and clearly she must have found out, well, okay, well, I can at least, not kill children and raise them, so
Hmm.
she wasn't as, you know just way more lenient, um
Hmm.
with my younger brother, and it's okay. Like, I'm not mad that he didn't experience some of the things. I think he takes some things for granted, that we crawled so you could walk, and that may
I
be
agree.
appreciated, but
I agree, but I took some whoopings from my brother. Like I took my fair share. Like he's supposed to be babysitting me, and he actually wants to be at the basketball game at his school. And so we're at the basketball game, and I lie that we've been home all night. Like I've gotten in trouble
Mhm.
many times. I
Yeah,
love my brother. I love
yeah.
him.
Um, oh, that's fascinating. That's great. Um, so I always start here as we're starting our conversation now.
Okay.
If you could tell us your origin story.
Hmm.
I asked you what your origin story was. What would that be, and who are some of the most important people in that story for yourself?
Ooh, I would say my origin story begins in Canarsie, Brooklyn. It's like the earliest I can remember as a child growing up and being very independent from a very young age because my brother, while he's 11 years older than me, by the time I was like 7 or 8, he was doing like his own thing. My mom always working really hard, my grandmother working really hard to provide. My dad also going through his experience with losing family members and a son and taking care of his mom. It left me in a place where I had to learn very early to be sharp and independent and do things on my own. So I would go to school on my own, come home on my own, do homework. There wasn't someone like, catering to me, rather. I'm not going to say they didn't care for me, but there wasn't anyone catering to me at that time as early as like 6 or 7 years old. So I would like get my food, make my food. By the time my mother came home, everything was done. My homework was done, dishes were done. All of that stuff was taken care of. And my life pretty much was like that for all of my childhood. I think I felt comfortable enough being independent and on my own very early. And so that happened. But my family, I have a large family, and my life was never void of them. They were there. We vacationed together, holidays together, um, weekends together. But I think my understanding of who I needed to be as a person, um, as a Black woman, my mother instilled in me that I had to work extremely hard, harder than my peers. One, because I was a woman, or one because I was a woman. Two, because I was a Black woman. So I never felt like I had an opportunity to relax or like take a break or um, be lazy. Laziness was like a sin in my household. So aside from like being so independent, there was always, as I got older, there was always this idea of like, um, I need to be working to provide. I need to um, be on at the top of every list in order to be seen and accepted. And I think I started to become rebellious in my teenage years because I was already tired. I started that life at like 7, 8 years old. By the time I was like 16, 17, I was over it. Like I didn't sign up for this. I didn't sign up to be this person, but I still had to go out into the world, and I've experienced a lot. I've had many. I've I've been able to accomplish a lot that most haven't, but not in traditional ways. And people are always like amazed of what I've experienced in my life and what I continue to do in my life. But I think I've I still I'm still very much just uh Afro Latina is the term they use now, girl from Brooklyn.
Mhm.
Um that has not left me.
Um, let me marry this to something you said earlier about you had siblings, but they were older than you.
Hmm.
So technically, you're socialized as an only child, right?
Pretty much,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, when that's nurtured in you, for in your developmental years, and this kind of idea of um, I have to take care of myself. I have duties to do. I have chores to do.
Hmm.
So you're surviving. And from a very
Yeah.
young age, you are doing what you need to do in order to have relief to be successful, whatever it is. And like you said, by the time you're 18, you almost tapped out. Like I'm tired. I've been a strong black woman since I was 6. Like I'm tired. And
That's really what it was.
yeah, and I'm interested in like there's a person we are in moments in our life that we become in order to survive.
Hmm.
But sometimes that doesn't always, as we get older and have different experience, that doesn't always apply to every situation. Like
Hmm.
to be fiercely independent, to be self-reliant, I'm sure it can be complicated if you want to be in relationship with somebody because you don't know how to depend on someone. You don't know how to have somebody come in and assume space in your life that you're used to taking up. And I'm
Hmm.
wondering, especially as you get older and start dating and going out, I'm wondering how, and even, in school with your relationship with your principals and teachers, professors, how did that become complicated? Did you notice that it was complicating for you? Did you know in your early relationships, like this seems to be something, or was it a problem at all for you?
Um, it definitely was a problem. And not because I didn't want to be in relationship or I didn't make efforts to be in relationship and not be the boss of the relationship,
Mhm.
but because I am a laid back person.
Mhm.
So because I'm laid back, people are never really prepared for the bossy me
Mhm.
or what could appear bossy. I think I always kind of like knew what to do. My brother, my father, my uncles will always say like I'm very sharp. Like you can't pull a fast one on me because I'm laid back and I'm observant. I kind of assess everything before I act or before I speak. And um, at growing up, like in school, I think I'm talented, so I was always on stage, whether it be acting, dancing. There was always me being in the forefront. But when I had the quickest opportunity to fall back, um, I would do that. And I think specifically in relationships, especially if you're in relationship with takers as opposed to givers, that comes across as being sometimes maybe naive, or sometimes nonchalant, and then people get the impression that they can walk all over you. And
Mhm.
it would be at that point that I'd have to be like, stop the show, hold on. Actually, that's not how this goes, right? So I think people navigating, learning me, and the how dynamic I was made relationships difficult, because I wasn't a person that would be like, here's who I am,
Mhm.
here's what you need to know. I kind of was more laid back, learning other people, and then people make assumptions, and it would get tricky. But I also have a very strong personality.
Mhm. Mhm.
So,
So you're laid back with a strong personality who
exactly.
doesn't who is not by default going to communicate. So, I can see that.
Uh-huh. I get it. I get that from my dad. I get that from my dad.
Let me say to everybody who joined us, Chuck, how are you? Talisa, yes, I've talked to everyone
Hi.
about the light. You're gonna get this purple rain light tonight because it's a brand new light
Oh
and I got
God.
it. And it's gonna be what it is tonight. So that's why it's dark where I am, but it's so dope to me. So we at least gonna do this for tonight. And everybody else, Samantha, everybody else who checked in, thank you for that. Um, you're raised in Brooklyn,
Hmm.
and I'm assuming this is the late '80s.
We can go with that. We can go with
Okay,
that.
so there are
I'm a
two things.
young millennial.
Yeah, so there's two things that are happening in Brooklyn during that time. There is great um, movement of independent holiness movement for Black people
Mhm.
in Harlem and Brooklyn, um, and there is the emergence of hip hop. Right, those were coexisting and emerging at the time, and I'm wondering for you. Um, and we've talked about this, in our group chat or whatever, about how did your faith shape who you are?
Ooh, this is such a good question. Um, so my family, it has a very diverse faith. I don't know if that's what I want to say. They worship differently,
Hmm.
many of my family members, and because I was often with different family members at different times,
Hmm.
I could have been anywhere. So I could potentially be on Friday nights watching the Ten Commandments and Ben Hur, because I'm at my uncle's house and they're 7-day Adventists. And so I'm at church on Saturday.
Hmm.
Or, and also be at church on Sunday with my aunt who's Episcopalian. And obviously their form of worship is different.
Hmm.
Or I could be with my sister who is Baptist. And obviously at that time, that worship was different.
Hmm.
My mom would attend also a different Episcopalian church. I went to a Lutheran school when I was in elementary age. So by the time I was in middle school, I was like, I don't know who Christ is really, but I'm gonna go with it.
Hmm. Hmm.
I I just had very different experiences in church.
Uh-huh.
And so it didn't really push me away from church, but the hypocrisy that existed became more prevalent for me because of all that I had experienced.
Uh-huh.
Um, I didn't really I'm obviously in church all my life, but I didn't really develop my relationship with Christ until I was 30.
Uh-huh.
So, and that was in a Pentecostal church.
Uh-huh.
Um, so, my grandmother, praying grandmother, every gift was a Bible. If she gave you money, it was in an envelope in a Bible.
Uh-huh.
So, a lot of that was instilled about the importance of depending on Christ and putting Him first in your life.
Uh-huh.
Uh, and I got that understanding from her more than I did from being in church.
Yeah, so I can relate. Um, I can relate to that because my dad was a musician, a church musician, and when I was a kid, if I went with him on a Sunday, we could be Catholic really early in the morning. Then he's gonna play
Mm-hmm.
for a Lutheran church, then a Baptist church by 11, then Church of God in Christ by 2,
Mm-hmm.
and then the spiritual churches, by 5, or Unitarian church or something like that. So I kind of grew up with this kind of wide ranging idea of seeing different styles and different tribes and
Mm-hmm.
different expressions of faith. And
Yeah.
it's interesting the way how you articulate it, that sometimes before growing up in that environment, we are introduced to people and the church before we are actually introduced to Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing people first, and I guess technically everybody knows people first, but knowing church people first can kind of complicate how you see Christ, or it's a lot of things in the way that you have to move out of your way in order
Mm-hmm.
to get to, you know, to your own relationship with Him. But simultaneously, what's happening with you or in Brooklyn is there's church, but there's also hip hop, and we're talking about.
And don't forget about the crack epidemic.
Well, we'll get to
Okay.
get to that.
I blame the crack epidemic for a lot of my life currently. But go
Got you.
ahead.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. But hip hop
Yes.
is it's not infected by capitalism, and it hasn't been enterprise yet. Like, it's on the streets, it's in parties, like it's in the neighborhoods. Do you remember what that was like growing up in Brooklyn about that time?
Um, yeah, because my brother and my sister were older, they were
Mhm.
very much into hip hop. My cousins were also, they're 4 and 5 years older than me, so they were uh, part of my introduction to hip hop as well.
Mhm.
My very first, so one of my uncles, recognizing the talents that I had, was um, always introducing me to new talents and new um, musical artists, and whether it was Broadway or rappers or singers. He took me to my first concert, which was Sade at Radio City Music Hall.
Mhm.
But he also introduced me to Salt and Pepper. So he bought me like a record player
Mhm.
and a bunch of albums. And those first few albums included New Edition, Salt and Pepper, Bobby Brown, Stacey Lattisaw, Mariah
Oh, I
Carey.
know.
Yeah.
It's a record.
Um, yeah. And I would just, I mean, as well as Michael and Whitney and Prince, all the greats. He's the one that introduced me to Prince. But I think um, I knew of like Houdini and Run DMC because of my uncle, but
Mhm.
my first like passion was Salt and Pepper.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this then,
Hmm.
um, and we'll get to crack in a minute. Cocaine. Um,
Great.
when did you first fall in love with hip hop?
Mm, I would say LL Cool J, Around the Way Girl.
Mm, 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 mm.
That was the first record that I ran in the ground. Not in the way Salt and Peppers wasn't, or everything wasn't. I couldn't play everything, Salt
Mhm,
and Pepper,
mhm,
but I definitely had a poster of LL Cool J on my ceiling. So when I was laying in bed, I could be looking up at him. So
mhm,
I,
mhm.
I have to say it was
No,
LL, Around
no,
the Way Girl.
of course it was. It was
Yeah.
you're in New York, so I get it. So cocaine, right?
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and I was thinking about this earlier today. That
You
again,
would think about cocaine today?
well, and let me.
Okay.
I was, but
That's
here's
okay.
how I was thinking about it. I was thinking about epidemics in black neighborhoods, and that line
Hmm.
in New York, in New Jack City, where Brown said, "Ain't no poppy fields." Right? How did the drugs get into the neighborhood? Right? Um, they were brought into the neighborhood. Well, who brought them into the neighborhoods? Who allowed them um, to go past customs and get into America and then concentrate the selling of it
Hmm.
in black neighborhoods? So when you say I was thinking about cocaine earlier, yes, this is why I was thinking about cocaine. But you were there. You were there. Hey, everybody. Corey, Victor, James. Hey, everybody, my friends. Um, so I want to know, like, what was that like for you and seeing that around you?
Um, so it's interesting. Okay, so much. My dad, after my obviously his experience with my brother being murdered changed the trajectory of his life.
Mm,
And he developed a drinking problem. So, or some would say it was a drinking problem. Um, I never knew it to be a problem because he was my dad and I was with him and things were good, but we were in bars, we were
mhm,
at off track betting. Um, and I would be just like this young girl with her dad in the bar, at the bar, or like off track betting. And obviously, in those settings, you see other types of people that come through, and my like no one was gonna mess with me with my dad, but it was just always interesting to like watch how vastly different their lives were compared to like the homes I was in when my mom was at work, like going to church here, there, and there, and
mhm,
being with my dad, and we're like at off track betting at the bar, and it's a different scenario.
mhm,
Um, but in my home, like in my grandmother's home, my grandmother had 9 kids, 6 were boys. Some of my uncles dabbled in um, using crack, and it was like, it was now that thinking back on it, it was really crazy. But at the time, it was like, this is just what you do, right? So, like, if they would come, if my grandmother would tell them they can't come to the house and they would come, she would be like, make sure they're not taking this, that, or other. You got to hide the VCR, you got to hide the radios, you got to hide all these things. And it just seemed like everyone was experiencing this. Like everyone in their home or everyone you were growing up with had someone in their home that had this problem or this disease or were addicted to this thing. So it never felt abnormal. It was just like your uncle's a crackhead, your aunt's a crackhead, yeah, my uncle's a crackhead too. Your father's a crackhead, yeah, my. It was just like something normal. But now, as an adult looking back, I'm like, yo, this is crazy, absolutely crazy.
So I'm assuming you don't do cocaine.
I
Uh,
don't do
okay.
cocaine.
You
Mm-mm.
know, and no judgments here. I get it. Just, I'm assuming you
No
don't.
cocaine for me. No white devil for me.
But there's a lot of people who say who grew up who use drugs, who abuse drugs,
Hmm.
and say, "Well, I am this way because of the environment. I grew up with it, right?
Hmm.
That's what I saw." And then there's some people who grew up in the same environment says, "Well, I am not this way because
Right.
this is what I saw," right? I'm interested in those different kind of genetics. I don't, you know, psyches or our makeup, where you're saying that I could have turned out, you know, and did it just like they did, but I didn't. So, did you recognize there was something in you to be like, no, this is what I'm not doing? Were you conscious?
Um, I I feel like my mom, um, one, my praying grandmother, but also my mom was very adamant about having a drug-free, alcohol-free household. Like my mom didn't even buy soda. You drink water or apple juice. So um, she was adamant about creating an environment for me that was void of these things that you could become addicted to. Um, and also was very intentional about having conversations with me about the impact. So, while a lot of parents shy away from having conversations with kids about the effects of certain things they may be introduced to at school or by friends outside of the home. My mom was the type of person that would sit it all in front of you, show you pictures of people who um, were affected by it and like how their life is turning out, like kind of like a scared straight scenario.
Mhm.
Um, I this is off topic, but as a nurse, she would. AIDS was another. The millennials have been through it. Child crack, AIDS, Katrina,
Yeah, yeah.
9/11. We struggling out here, but we're making it.
Okay.
So, she had a patient who was dying from AIDS, and she, I guess, the patient wanted to marry his girlfriend before passing, so they had a wedding in their living room.
Mhm.
And he's like on this hospital bed in the living room. And my mom is like, you should come with me to see this patient just in case you're thinking about having sex. And I'm just like, what? 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 And so she dragged me with her, and
Mhm.
we in the living room, and it's a wedding ceremony. He's in the bed, like I'm just like, this is a lot. This is a
I'm sure
lot.
you,
I
after
live
that
in.
you would want to do a few things, like a whole bunch of stuff. Like I don't want to leave the house. I don't want to. I don't want to. This is
It's a lot. It was so much.
a little bit. Uh,
Hmm.
did it work?
It did work. I actually became um, presenter and speaker for World AIDS Day in high school,
Mhm.
because of the knowledge I had gathered from not just my mom, but I used to volunteer at her um, job as in end of middle school and high school. So I learned a lot about what was happening with people during that time who were suffering from HIV/AIDS.
Mhm. Um, so in the midst of all of that, I'm interested
Hmm.
in where did you get your definition and your language for love? Um, and was that taught to you? Did they sit you down and say, "Well, this is what love is. This is what it isn't," or was it something you observed and then understood that to be love, and then found your own language for
That is a great question. Um, I think growing up with my mom and dad separated, I I never felt like there wasn't love between them. I felt like their lifestyles didn't work together.
it?
Um, and it's hard to understand that as a child, that if these two people love each other, why wouldn't they be together? But as I got older, I understood why their lifestyles couldn't be
It's a little more
together.
complicated than that, ain't it?
Right, right. Um, and watching my aunts and uncles, who those who were married, I understood that um, you two are one. You two are different people, but one person at the same time. And I don't know how to describe it, but I understood that as a child. Like, there isn't one without the other. And so my understanding of love and marriage was you need the other person, or um, you need to be in relationship with someone.
Mhm.
I think for me, I always maybe look for someone who was as powerful as my dad, but I never felt like the men that I encountered fully embodied that I grew up seeing, as far as the men who took care of me, my brothers, my uncles, my father. They were very protective. They were very laid back, but also like there wasn't arguing, there wasn't a battle. It's like what they said was what it was. And I never found that in a person. Like, I kind of feel like at times that I could put all the men I've dated together. It
Mhm.
might make that person that I've had in my head.
Mhm.
But as I got older, I understood love to be more about my actions, and who I was, and what I was willing to give up to be in partnership and in relationship with someone else.
Mhm.
So younger was more about who that person needs to be that I connect to. Now, and I say within the last 10 years, it's been more about who I want to be
Mhm.
in relationship with
Mhm.
someone else.
Mhm. That's awesome, and that's a no, no, no. That's a great answer to another question. The question I asked you was,
Oh, God.
who taught you about love, and where did you get that definition from?
Um, so not all the people I
Trying to do that
named.
Renata
Okay.
thing. Yeah, you gave me.
Okay.
I saw it.
Not all the people I named. Who taught me about love?
Mhm.
I would say God.
Mhm.
Um,
Give me somebody
because
else. I know
why?
God is everything. He's beautiful. Got it.
No, but the reason you're not gonna listen to why?
Okay,
Okay.
go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
The reason I say God is because I have had experiences in relationship that would make someone bitter, angry, hurt,
Mhm.
um, unwilling to love.
Mhm.
And God has not only given me insight about who I was in those scenarios, but also made it okay for me to still love those people, even though
Mhm.
the experience they created would be one that would make them unlovable.
Mhm.
And I'm okay with that. and
Gotcha.
I don't have to be with them.
No, you should. You absolutely do not. No, not if you don't want to. Um,
Mhm.
I wanna, I wanna, I wanna pick up on something you said or someone you've mentioned two or three times at least. Is your grandmother? I think grandmothers are
Mhm.
amazing. I had the best grandmother ever, and it seems like your grandmother played a significant
Mhm.
role in your life. Can you talk
Yeah.
about her a little bit?
She is uh she's a very strong woman. Obviously, one who gave birth to 9 children. Um
God bless her.
and yeah, she 9 children by 2 different men. One my so my mom's
Shout out to
dad,
grandmother. You know.
yeah,
Yeah.
my mom's dad, I never met. He passed in Guyana, so I never had the opportunity to meet him. But
Mhm,
my uncles, my mother's youngest siblings,
mhm,
their father, I met him, and um, my grandmother, he's laid back, chill, calm vibes.
mhm,
My grandmother is was a master cook. She loved to crochet, very independent, does what she I remember driving down the street and seeing her like pushing a cart, and she's like 80 something at this time, and I'm like, what are you doing out here? And she's like, I have things to do. And I'm just like, okay,
mhm,
well, you're gonna get in the car. But she life of the party.
mhm,
She beautiful, of course.
mhm,
Very loving. Everyone loved her. Everyone wanted to be at her home because one, that's where all the good food was, and
mhm,
two, she was guaranteed to give you some jewels and some wisdom
mhm.
to move forward in life and um, protect your heart.
So I'm curious. You mentioned food, and
Hmm.
your dad's Cuban. Your mom is
Hmm.
Guyanese. Guyanese? Did I say that right?
Guyanese.
Guyanese. Yes.
Yes, we'll
Um,
go with that.
yeah. What kind of food did you grow up? Was
Ooh.
it was it island? Did they bring some of their recipes over, and that's what you grew up on, or was it more American fare?
There was very little American fare in my home. It was always like curry chicken, oxtail, roti, stew, everything, stew beef, stew chicken, stew everything, curry everything.
Mhm,
Um, a lot of provisions like vegetables. My grandmother would grow food in the yard, grow vegetables. So um, a lot of things I didn't like, like
mhm,
okra. I hate okra. I
mhm,
She also very much you're sitting at the table until your plate is empty. So
mhm,
whether you liked it or not, you
mhm,
were eating it. My father, the same, a lot of Spanish dishes, steak, rice and beans, plantains, stewed beef.
mhm,
My father loved to cook as well.
mhm, mhm.
Well, actually, I don't know if he loved to do it, but he did it.
That sounds amazing.
Mhm.
That sounds awesome. So you learn about love, and I think one of the what we've talked about before on the show is that if the church teaches us about love, if they do that, um, they don't teach us about heartbreak. They don't teach
Mhm.
us about what happens when the relationship doesn't work out the way you intended it to work out, and now you're brokenhearted and crushed. And I'm wondering for you, very early on in your relationships when they maybe didn't work out the way you wanted them to work out, what was your grieving process? And I think I'm more in my life understanding that when we lose someone we love through a breakup, it is grief. It is as significant loss as if they die, and we
Mhm.
experience it the same way. And so, for a young person, a young Black woman, I'm wondering, how did you experience those moments of your life?
Um, Interesting. Um, so my first time feeling like I'm heartbroken,
Mhm,
maybe, was I so in high school as a freshman,
mhm,
I was dating a senior, and I went to his prom with him and everything. Um, Very respectful young man. We are kind of friends to this day now that he's separated from his wife. Long story. But
all
he,
right.
well, let me preface, I was not messing with a married man. That's not how this goes. Was not messing with a married man. His wife just preferred that we not communicate once they got engaged, and
Okay,
he obliged.
there it
So
is.
there's that.
Yeah, yeah.
So I went to his prom with him, but obviously, as a senior, he's going off to college, and so he
Mhm,
went off to college in Georgia, and I immediately things changed. Obviously, you a young Black man on campus in Georgia from New York, I could only imagine what life was like, and the calls became less, the communication became less. Heartbroken, yes. Understood what was happening, because it was something we had conversations about prior to him leaving.
mhm,
But at that time, I was just like, I guess this is what it is, and I never was really like pursuing relationships after that. I find that when I go through a hard breakup, that I will be single for quite some time, and I think I just want to relearn myself, be single and understanding myself again and what I want moving forward, reflecting on the relationship. I've always done that.
mhm,
And so there are periods where I'm single for a long time because I'm just choosing not to be in a relationship.
mhm, mhm. Did it get better did that experience get better? Because we get relationships and we're optimistic and then it doesn't work out. I I'm wondering, do we get better at breakups? Do we get or do we become more efficient about our process um, as we get older?
um, each breakup that I've had has been for very different reasons. So, um, drastically different reasons. I think we always grieve the idea of what could have been. So I feel like there's always that grief.
Mhm,
But I don't know that there is a cookie cutter way to get over a breakup. I think the reflection process supports transitioning and moving on.
mhm,
But depends on the circumstances. I've had breakups from abusive relationships. I've had breakups from that were like, this just isn't what we need right now, or like, we don't work. You're a great person, I'm a great person, but we don't work, and we can be cool, we can be friends. So
mhm.
I think it depends on like who you are and what you understand about yourself and what you want in life and what you want out of a relationship.
Yeah, I think it's as I've gotten older and looked over my shoulder, it's fascinating the types of breakups we have, right? Sometimes you break up. When I was younger, I thought when you broke up, it had to break. That means we have to be angry and mean and hateful, and that energy pushes us away from one another, and that's how we break up. Then you get older, you're able to use your words, you're able to be more emotionally aware. And like you said, a breakup could experience is like, I'm great, you're great. This just doesn't work between you and
Mhm.
I. And while that is disappointing, and I've experienced that, it wasn't as heartbreaking as some of the earlier emotional, messy um,
Mhm.
things that times that I had experienced in my life. Do you think becoming older and hopefully as we mature, and I know, like you said, there's no one way, but there is an efficient way. If it's no more, like you said, okay, I'm going to be single for a minute because I need this time to kind of let this
Mhm.
cycle through, and I understand that about myself, and there's no sense in me jumping right back into something else. Do you think do we get better at healing as we get older?
I don't want to speak for everyone. I'll speak for myself and say that I've I've gotten better at reflecting on my actions and the role I play
Mhm.
in a relationship and in a breakup. And I've un- I think in different stages of your life, whether you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, the way you approach everything is different. And so a breakup in my 20s, I think I did what I understood was necessary as a 20-year-old. But
Mhm.
now in my 40s, um, breaking up is different, right? In your 20s, you feel like you have time to burn. And
Mhm.
in your 40s, the reflection is different because you feel like you don't have time, especially as a woman. And
Mhm.
so sometimes those breakups seem like wasted time. And I think that is where people get tripped up. And so if we're speaking about me breaking up better, I think I've learned to not look at it as wasted time and not look at it as um, a negative experience, even if there were negative circumstances, but look at it as a learning experience and an opportunity for me to do better, or have a better experience the next time I dive into a relationship.
Yeah, I think the same way. Um, I think I've come to a point in my life where hopefully I've grown enough to be like, well, this didn't work out the way I wanted it to work out, the way I intended it to work out, and that's okay. Um, I can be heartbroken over this because it didn't work out the way I thought it was going to work out. But what is also true is for whatever time we had with one another, in the best case scenario, I felt loved. I felt a little less alone. I felt supported. And that's way
Mhm.
more than what someone else had during that same time, right? And so that's like my door into finding gratefulness even in relationships that weren't the success that I wanted them to be. Um, Even when someone chose someone else or something else other than me or the relationship. And I say that because I spent a lot of times being angry. Spent a lot of years. And sometimes it wasn't just romantic relationships. It was like it could have been a job or it could have been a friend and
Mhm.
something happened. And like I'm angry for years about it instead of thinking like, oh well, you know, I would still like to be on that job, but I had it when I had it, and there's something else, and it's okay. And so I think like that could be applied like across the board to a myriad of spaces in our lives.
Yeah.
Do you? One of the things that you talk about that I've learned about you is your investment in being a great mother. And I feel like I kind of know your daughter a little bit, and I've never met her. Would not know her if she walked up to me in the street. But through our communication. You learn about her, and I'm wondering, how did you experience early motherhood? Um, was it something you planned, or was it something that you feel like you were ready for? And when it happened, did you experience? Was it the experience you thought it was going to be?
Um, that is such a loaded question. So, um, given that I come from uh, a, such a large family, there are always a lot of children around.
Mhm.
Um, my brother has 7 kids. My sister has 3. Some of those children obviously are older because my siblings were so much older than me, so they have children. So there are always a lot of children around, and I was more of like a free spirit. Like I'm the babysitter, but I'm also out doing me. And I think I probably, if my family had to say who's gonna have a kid, they wouldn't have they wouldn't have pointed at me.
Mhm.
And not because I didn't want children, because I love children, which is why I work with children, but because I was so like free spirited and liked my freedom to move and go as I please.
Mhm.
I did envision my life with children, a lot of children, like being married and having children. And I was on birth control because I knew I was not really prepared, I would say, for what I understand is necessary to have a child. But I got pregnant on birth control.
Mhm.
And oddly enough, I also had what was an ovarian cyst. And so it was so large that it engulfed one of my ovaries. So not only was I on birth control, but I had this ovarian cyst that engulfed one of my ovaries. So like the chances of becoming very pregnant very slim, and I got pregnant anyway.
Mhm.
Mm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chuck,
Um,
like this is just what's supposed to happen. Like it's
yeah, exactly. I was just like, okay. And I didn't even know I was pregnant. I actually started to feel pain in my abdomen and went to the doctor, and they told me that I had an ovarian cyst, but also that I was pregnant.
Mm,
So it was a lot to digest at
mm,
one time.
mhm,
And then I had to have a surgery while I was 5 months pregnant
mhm,
to remove the cyst because it was continuing to grow and very dangerous for the pregnancy.
mhm,
So here I am, 5 months pregnant. They're cutting me open to take out this cyst, and it was just a lot. Like my pregnancy was a lot, and I was young. I was 25 at the time. 20, yeah, 25, and I, as a person who is very intentional, wanted to make sure that my child had the best mom,
mhm,
the best parents. But for me, I can only control, myself. So I was intentional about everything that I did when it came to life as a mom, starting from like my pregnancy and where I would go, like who I would connect with while I was pregnant, who my friend group was when my daughter was born, and the families we would connect with. I don't like when she was younger, I didn't leave her too many places. Like super intentional from the beginning about creating the life for her that she deserves.
mhm. She's a teenager now.
Ooh, 16.
Of course, those are two different experiences. You're at a
Hmm.
very specific stage in your motherhood, and in a couple of years, I'm sure she'll, school and flat a nest. I'm wondering how you're experiencing motherhood now, and how do you foresee those transitions that are happening in her life that will happen in your life?
Um, it's interesting because we are very close. We don't have the strife that most um, mother daughters speak about when their children are in their teen years.
Hmm.
Um, She speaks to me about any and everything. I support her in everything. I can't speak to how that she always feels this way. There are times when, I have to reprimand her, and I think she takes it as any child would or should. Um, we are very close. So I'm not concerned about me,
Hmm.
but I am concerned about what life for her without me so being close to her will be like when she's like off to college.
Hmm. Hmm.
Only because she thinks she's growing up a Kardashian. She about to struggle. She's about to struggle.
To know what life really is. This is what.
Yeah, yeah. She's about to struggle. She's like, I'm like, when you're on campus, like you have to figure out like your meals. She's like, you're gonna Hello Fresh my food. So,
Mm,
oh, okay.
okay. Yeah. Okay.
So
Yeah, I
she's
need to be around because I need to see how that's gonna work out. Like.
me too. Same, same. I think the trickiest thing is supporting her and navigating
Mhm,
her relationships with young men
mhm, mhm, mhm.
and like how she's interacting with them and
Sure.
uh yeah,
Sure.
because they are her, they are her,
I'm sure. Yeah.
yeah,
know. Yeah.
and they're different breeds.
They're definitely this generation, whatever these young kids are.
Hmm.
I call them fetuses when I'm in DC. Um, they different. They are.
And there's so much more access with social media.
Yeah. The world is way broader than
Hmm.
ours were when we were their age, and so yeah, they're an interesting bunch. You, along with being a mother, you're an educator, administrator, and you give us these tales that that are heartbreaking and hilarious at the
Hmm.
same time. And I'm wondering, how did you get involved? How did you pick this vocational path for yourself?
Interesting scenario. So, I went to school for fashion. I went to school here in New York that is no longer in existence, but also attended FIT and Pratt.
Mhm,
I studied fashion design and I worked a lot in the fashion industry, wardrobe stylist for some time, wardrobe stylist assistant, working with High School Musical cast, Cheetah Girls, Tyrese Gibson, a lot of that. But and a lot of this work was happening as I became pregnant and my daughter was very young. Um, and it was not as stable, consistent, but not stable. So, especially working with Disney, you'd have to like fly to Florida, fly to LA, and it's like, what do you do with your 6 month old?
mhm,
Um, so I decided to pursue a path that would provide the stability I needed to support my daughter and also be a mom full time alone because I was raising her alone. Um, I started my first job in education was actually in higher ed at a fashion school where I would support. I worked in career development, so I would support students in getting internships and jobs upon graduation in the fashion field, like going over their resumes, helping them uh, do internships with Fashion Week and volunteer opportunities. And so that started to kind of where my interest in working in education was peaked, I guess.
mhm.
I chose the role because it was associated with fashion, but in that role, I started to develop this passion for supporting young people in their education and career paths.
Uh-huh.
And so I kind of went back and forth between like fashion and education, but this role that I'm in now, I grew into this role. It wasn't my first role with this organization,
Mhm.
but it fell in my lap, and I was like, "Oh, this seems cool." And
Mhm.
here I am, 7 years later, leading middle school.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's interesting.
Do you like your job?
I I like certain aspects of my job.
Mhm.
So I do a lot, and there's a lot that I don't speak about, or a lot that people wouldn't even realize I'm responsible for.
Mhm.
So outside of just being an administrator, like I manage a $5 million budget. I manage the whole facilities. I manage schedules, systems. I do family communications. Sometimes I feel like I'm co-parenting with
Mhm.
300 families. I
Mhm.
manage student behaviors, community outreach, a lot of different things.
Mhm.
And still am like present all day to make sure kids are not writing graffiti in the bathroom or stabbing each other in class with their pencils.
Mhm.
So it can be a lot. And
It
so,
sounds like a lot. It
yeah,
sounds like
yeah. And so having to navigate all of that, I don't like, but I do love to support my community and students,
Mhm.
and being there to love on our Black and Brown children,
Mhm.
especially.
Okay, I'm gonna let you go. And thank you for taking the time. Okay, I'm gonna let you go. Hopefully, you'll come back and then we can finish all the stuff that I did not get a chance to ask.
Wow, there was more.
There's more. There's more. But
Okay.
I want to talk about your podcast,
Mm-hmm.
Reimagine with Renata. I've listened
Mm-hmm.
to it, and I had the privilege of being on it last week or so. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
interested in um, what prompted you to kind of want this space to kind of have the conversations that you're having. Was there an event, or is this something like, well, felt like I could do this and this is something that I want to do?
That is a great question. I feel like I've always, and I've said this on IG Live the other day, I've always felt like the conversations that happen um, for our people are grounded in struggle
Mm,
and are not progressive in a sense of reimagining what life could be like, what we can create
mm,
as people for our generation or the generations to come, like what new standards we can set,
mm,
and how we reteach the world to treat us
mm,
and be with us.
mm,
And so this is the beginning of those conversations, which I hope will become a larger conversation on a larger platform,
mm,
network television at night. Just
mm,
saying.
mhm.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, I think it's great. And then before you leave, you have to tell everybody where they can
Mhm.
find the podcast. So I got quick 5 questions, lightning.
Five.
Just one,
Okay.
boom, boom, boom. Hit
I'll
them.
try to be quick.
You good. You good. You're good. You ready?
I think so.
Okay. First question. Do you believe in love at first sight?
I do.
Okay. Um, what has love taught you?
Uh, Patience.
Okay. Um, what do you believe about love now that you didn't before?
That it's a choice.
Mhm. Um, what makes a good lover?
Active listening.
Okay. All right. Next question, last question. What brings you joy?
Mm. Seafood. Lobster in particular.
It's the little things in life, It doesn't have
Uh-huh.
to be.
No, I'm
Oh,
not that difficult.
no,
I'm
all
not that
right.
difficult.
Well, thank you for hanging out. Thank you for coming on the show. I'm glad we were able to do this. I am.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate it. Before you leave, could you tell people who want to connect with you and listen to the podcast, where can they find you across social media?
Yes, so my name again is Renata Del Carmen, and my Instagram handle is Rain with Renata, REIGN with Renata.
Mhm.
Twitter, Rain with Renata, TikTok, Rain with Renata, and the podcast is available where podcasts are heard, streamed at Reimagine with Renata.
That's awesome. Thank you again for coming and being on the pod. Thank you to everybody who hung out with us all this time. Jody, we see you. Yolanda, good. Thank you for hanging out with us. Everybody who's with us. I think we got one more episode for this year, and it's going to be a big episode, and I can't wait for you to find out who's coming and to be a part of that conversation. So, again, thank you all for hanging out, spending some time with me. And Renata, again, thank you for blessing us with your presence.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Be safe. See you again next week or, on the next episode of the pod. All right. Bye bye.